Well, hello everybody, and welcome to our 24th now video lecture. This one is on Vietnam, and just in case, there are some pictures on here that some students have found disturbing in the past, so I put that little disclaimer up there. That wasn't me trying to be funny, it was actually just in case, and I'll let you know if you need to turn away, just in case, you never know. Alright. This is key concept 8.1, Roman numeral 1, letter B. We look at our concept here. We see, again, it's all the Cold War issues. As the United States, after World War II, is taking on more responsibilities, it's asserting and attempting to defend its position as a global leader. Right? And that's one of the reasons why it's going to get involved in Vietnam, because it's trying to become a global leader against communism. But this is going to create both domestic, did I say that word correctly, domestic and international consequences. Now we'll talk about the domestic ones in class with the counterculture revolution that takes place in America. But international consequences, there are a lot of them when we're dealing with the Cold War, but today we're going to look at specifically Vietnam. After World War II, again, America is trying to stop the growth of communism. They're trying to stop the military power of the Soviet Union. They're trying to stop their ideological influence that they have in Asia, in Latin America, and Africa. And here we're going to get to containment policy as it comes and it tries to now get itself in these military engagements. Korea was first, but Vietnam is the bigger and the more famous of them all. So there are your concepts. And there's where your multiple choice questions will derive from. The rest of this is all content. However, some of this obviously can also be a question or two. So where to start with Vietnam? It's not an easy starting point, to be honest with you. I used to teach a class solely on the history of Vietnam. And you'd have to go back a long time ago in order to do that. But I thought, really, let's start off here right after World War II, the French Indochina War. See, Vietnam was a colony of the French. They had colonized the country back in the 1880s. They had lost some of its control after World War I. Woodrow Wilson refused to recognize Vietnamese independence and became a French colony again. And then Japan invades Vietnam during World War II and occupied Vietnam. And of course, during this time period, Vietnamese fighters fought alongside American fighters to overthrow the Japanese. And then what winds up happening after the war, Vietnam again wants its independence. Ho Chi Minh, here's his name right here. Ho Chi Minh is this leader of a nationalist Vietnam, and he's thinking about having a unified Vietnam. But the British and the United States decide not to support Ho Chi Minh for various reasons. They believe he's a communist mostly. And they divide the country in half at the 17th parallel line. The northern part of Vietnam becomes communist, and South Vietnam is democratic. Okay, I was waiting to see if someone was going to say that, but then I realized I'm talking to myself. So you have two Vietnams, but France wants one Vietnam, so this war begins between, they call it the Indochina War, not wanting to recognize an independent Vietnam. The United States will support the French. Eisenhower will send billions of dollars to support the French in this nearly 10-year-long war. And in the end, France loses. They lose at this major battle known as Diem and Phu, this valley region where the French were trying to build an airfield. But they found this valley area, Dien Bien Phu. They paratrooped soldiers in this area, thousands of them, to try to build a landing strip, to build an airfield, not realizing they're surrounded by a mountain range, feeling that it's impossible for an army to scale a mountain range. And that's exactly what the Viet Minh do. The Viet Minh, by the way, that is the army of North Vietnam. That is the communist army right there. They scale the sides of the mountains. They surround the valley and they bombard it for several days with their cannon, basically killing thousands of French soldiers, and they're forced to surrender. And thereby France loses the Indochina War when they lost the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. Now the United States gets involved politically. They don't want Vietnam simply to turn to communism. This is part of their containment policy, domino theory. They have the Geneva Convention, the United States, France, Vietnam, the Soviet Union, China. They're all here to decide what will happen with Vietnam. They're going to keep it divided at the 17th parallel line, and they decide within 2 years, 1956, there will be a general election, the Geneva Accords. They'll allow a general election between both countries to decide, to vote, if they want to go communist or if they want to stay democratic. Ho Chi Minh uses something called the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a trail that comes out of North Vietnam down into Cambodia and into South Vietnam, where he sends thousands of people this route to try to infiltrate South Vietnam so that he can throw the vote. When the United States finds out about this and South Vietnam finds about this, the election of 1956 is postponed indefinitely. There will be no vote, and they'll keep the country separated. Talk a little bit about the president of South Vietnam, Diem. He's a Democratic-backed president. He is the president of South Vietnam. The United States will back him. He was French educated. He was educated in France, as a lot of well-to-do Vietnamese were at the time. Spoke fluent French and English. He was also a devout Catholic, which made him a minority in Vietnam. The majority of that country is Buddhist, and he begins to highly persecute them. And I'm sorry, I probably should have given fair warning here. Here's one of my first of these hard pictures to look at. When he begins to heavily persecute the Buddhists, tries to shut down their temples, arrest several of their monks, the leader of this movement practices what's called self-immolation. This individual here, Quang, sets himself on fire in the streets of Saigon. I'm sorry, I had a moment there, Saigon. And this starts an entire movement now with the Buddhist monks. In protest of their persecution, in honor of the first monk who did it, several others will also find places throughout Saigon and set themselves on fire. Self-immolation, where you take your own life, though it's in protest of something going on. It's not considered suicide, although technically that's what it is, but it's a religious movement that's taking place. This angers the people of South Vietnam against President Diem. His own army, we call it the ARVN, stands for Army of the Republic of Vietnam. They no longer support Diem. He's lost all support from the army. They want to overthrow him. They want to have a coup. The United States is warned about this. And Diem and his brother flee. They run away to a Catholic church to try to get asylum. It's not going to work. They're going to be arrested. And as they're taken into the car, as they get in the backseat of the car, I believe it's at that time that both he and his brother will be shot dead on November 2nd, 1963. And a new government will emerge in Vietnam, in South Vietnam, one that will also be supported by the United States. But this starts to show you some of the tension that's taking place with the government of South Vietnam, the United States. The United States, after 63, will start to feel it needs to have a bigger, wider role in South Vietnam. Now, as you also know, in that same month of 1963, 10 days later, 20 days later, JFK is assassinated. Now we have Johnson's president. 1964 is an election year. He is trying to get Civil Rights Act passed. He is going to declare war on poverty. He's setting the stage for what he is eventually going to unleash his great society. But at the same time, remember, it's the blanket of the Cold War is taking place, 1964. And as we mentioned in class, Barry Goldwater is the Republican challenger, and he is threatening to use atomic weapons against Vietnam. He famously said, if you will not use atomic weapons, you are silly and sissified. And that was part of that daisy commercial I showed you in class, where the young girl picking the daisies, counting, and then the countdown, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, her eyeball explodes in a massive mushroom cloud. And he's trying to show America that while he's not for war, he's not for atomic power, he still is going to be tough against the communists, though. And we have this strange situation that takes place in the Gulf of Tonkin, which is, here's Vietnam. This is North Vietnam. South Vietnam is the blue. Hanoi is the capital of North Vietnam. Saigon, which is down in here, is the capital of I say Hanoi is the capital of North Vietnam, and Saigon is the capital of South Vietnam. While on Navy exercises, on August 2nd, 1964, the USS Maddox is attacked by 3 North Vietnamese Navy torpedo boats. It defends itself, and the ships leave. 2 days later, in that same area, the USS Maddox, now joined by the USS Turner Joy, and these are 2 pictures of the actual ships, are now in the same area, and they both report that they have been fired upon by Vietnamese torpedo boats. In fact, one of the ships even engages in a direction they believe that these torpedo boats are in. Now, I have a question mark here, because it's the attack of August 4th that Johnson sets now into motion this war against Vietnam. But we've come to find out many years later, there never was a second attack. It was confusion on part of the radar operators on both ships, seeing ghost echoes really than anything else. There were no torpedoes. There was no second attack. There was a first attack, August 2nd. They can verify there actually was a first attack, but not the second one. But it's based on that second attack that Johnson now goes before Congress, and he asked for basically war-making powers to protect American interests against the aggression of the communists of North Vietnam. We call this the Tonkin Gulf Resolution. The Gulf and Tonkin Resolution. It gives him full powers. Here we go, Tonkin Gulf Resolution. His reasoning, his thought again is he's running for election. In 1964, he's running for his own election. He wants to make sure he wins it. While he's telling Americans he will not use atomic bombs, he still has to be tough on communism because China was lost under the Truman administration, a Democrat, and Republicans had always charged Democrats that they were soft on communism. And here's a quote from LBJ. "I'm not going to be the president who saw Southeast Asia go the way China went." So with this Tonkin Gulf Resolution, it's a blank check. It gave Johnson war-making power without declaring war. And this is another famous quote from Lyndon Johnson. "It's like Grandma's nightshirt. It covers everything." He could do whatever he wants now. And he wins his election of 64 in a landslide. And so he believes he also now has this mandate to not only give us the Great Society, which will cost billions, but now escalate a war in Vietnam. He will unleash on the Vietnamese Operation Rolling Thunder. This is a bombing mission. It's the Air Force in the beginning and only the Air Force. His Secretary of Defense is the same person who was John Kennedy's Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara. He's the one who advises him to do it this way. March 2nd, 1965, so you see just a few months after his inaugural address would be January of 65. So we have 2 months later, Operation Rolling Thunder, the sustained carpet bombing of North Vietnam. Every single day they will bomb targets, bridges, factories. They'll bomb the Ho Chi Minh Trail I was telling you about earlier, which goes into Cambodia. So they'll bomb that. They'll bomb Hanoi, the capital of North Vietnam, on a daily basis. Because every time they bomb something, the Vietnamese simply rebuild it. If they bomb bridges, within a few weeks, their bridges are back. And they have to bomb them all over again. What winds up happening from 1965 onward is you find Vietnam is a lush, tropical garden jungle. Just beautiful, beautiful trees, thick forests, jungle everywhere. But much of it is going to be turned into the surface of the moon by the time this is all over. They will drop more tonnage of bombs on North Vietnam than in all of World War II. All of World War II. They'll drop more tonnage of bombs on North Vietnam. Now the problem comes, you can bomb individuals from the air, but eventually you're going to have to send in ground forces. And later on I'll show you some parts of a documentary called Fog of War, how he starts to think about should we send in the Marines or not send in the Marines. And eventually a ground war will begin within a year, year and a half. And by 1968, over 500,000 U.S. troops will be serving in South Vietnam. Here's another one of these. This is a very famous, iconic picture here. And it's, again, sometimes disturbing to see. But when America went into Vietnam, they said they were fighting for the hearts and minds of the people of Vietnam. And that's good intentions. I totally agree with that. However, there is a total miscalculation here. America saw Vietnam solely as an aspect of the Cold War. They saw this only in the eyes of a Cold War situation. So they believed this was a civil war between South and North Vietnam. And it was not a civil war ever. It was a revolution from the beginning. It was a revolution for independence. The good people of Vietnam truly could care less as to who was governing them. They simply wanted an independent nation. And if America might have understood that a little bit more, things could have turned out completely different. Now, I'm going to give you a little backstory here of this young girl. She's now a full-grown woman. She's in her 50s. She lives in Canada. She has Canadian citizenship. This is a village that she was in. It was not bombed by the United States Air Force. I want to make sure they're clear about that. The ARVN bombed it, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. They were bombing, they were targeting a group of people I'm going to talk about here in a few moments, known as the Viet Cong. And I'll explain to you who that is. Now, bombing this particular village, ground troops of the ARVN began to evacuate, and civilians began to come with them as they were evacuating the city as it was being bombed, because it had been taken over by aspects of the Viet Cong. Well, one pilot saw the ground troops coming out. He mistook them for Viet Cong, and he bombed them with napalm. Napalm is a firebomb. And unfortunately, he didn't realize, but he was actually bombing his own troops, and he was bombing peaceful civilians. This young girl caught on fire. She was wearing clothes, but she stripped off her clothes as she literally caught fire. A Canadian reporter was here. They totally believed that she would not survive this. Every nurse that was here, got her to hospital. They all said there's no way she's going to survive. But she wound up surviving, and a Canadian family wound up adopting her and bringing her to Canada, where she has lived ever since. There are foundations in her name. But it just shows you the aspect of what this war was like. There is a lot of civilian casualties that take place. There's a lot of friendly fire death that will take place. The American Army was not a volunteer army like World War II. That was a volunteer army. World War I was basically a volunteer army. Even the Civil War was basically a volunteer army. This was predominantly a drafted army made up of 18, 19, 20-year-old boys who did not want to be there, could care less about anything, and that is going to create a lot of social issues in Vietnam with the American Army. So let me tell you about the Viet Cong. Now, if you remember in the slide earlier, the Viet Minh is the actual army of North Vietnam. The Viet Cong is something different. These are South Vietnamese farmers by day, guerrilla fighters at night. These are farmers who have turned to Marxist communism and are going to support North Vietnam to free their country. In their mind, they are revolutionaries. In their mind, they are George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. Many of these Viet Cong guys could actually recite by heart the Declaration of Independence. Very patient, very willing to accept casualties. They will kill themselves in order to take out American troops. That's how dedicated these young men are going to be. They're going to help supply routes over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. There it is again. Obviously, this is something I want you to remember. The Ho Chi Minh Trail. It comes again out of North Vietnam into Cambodia, into South Vietnam. And that's how Ho Chi Minh's army would supply the Viet Cong. They will set booby traps throughout South Vietnam. All kinds of things. I mean, tiger pits, for instance. You're literally in a jungle. There are tigers in Vietnam. And a guy falls into a hole. He doesn't realize there's a hole there, and there are tigers in there. They'll set bamboo traps. He's planting a landmine. Individuals will actually go into camps and pretend to be friends with the GIs. Young women do their laundry, and in one day come in, and instead of doing the laundry, they throw hand grenades into the tents, killing American GIs. You could not tell who the enemy was. One of the worst things about the Vietnam War, this is the one war that the United States Army won every single battle they're ever in. But there are truly no battle lines. You were fighting everywhere in every direction because of the Viet Cong. You were fighting in the cities, you were fighting in the villages, you were fighting in hamlets. You didn't know who exactly the enemy was. One of the worst moments during the war is what is known as the Tet Offensive. Now I'm going to go into that in detail in class. But Tet is a New Year's celebration for Vietnam, and they ordered a ceasefire. And they believed at this point the Viet Cong was basically defeated. They believed that the Viet Minh army was basically defeated, and within 6 months to a year, this war should be over. And Tet proved everybody wrong. The Viet Cong and the Viet Minh organized attacks all over South Vietnam. They attacked multiple cities. They attacked 12 U.S. bases. Now they lose. The United States military has its most sounding victory of all the war during the Tet Offensive, and it's actually in two parts. Tet happened twice. These are U.S. Marines fighting in Saigon, and they're fighting from building to building, fighting the Viet Cong, and they wind up basically decimating the Viet Cong when this is all said and done. But what Tet does, and I'm going to go into this in class as well, it destroyed Johnson's administration. Lyndon Johnson will not seek re-election in '68 because of what happens at Tet. And the American public, they saw this. This was our first televised war. The first time news crews went live in the battlefields and showed what was happening on television. And Americans lost favor for this war. Even though it's a victory, it was really a loss because the American people basically stopped supporting the war. My Lai Massacre also takes place. It's an event that takes place in conjunction with Tet. Melee or Melee, how you pronounce this, is a hamlet where American soldiers went in and wound up massacring a group of friendly villagers, believing they were in fact Viet Cong. There's a whole lesson I used to do on this, but really there's not a lot of time. But just know that this is one of these things too, that when Americans find out that certain massacres take place in Vietnam, there's a lot of brutality in Vietnam. America's taste for this war shrinks, and by 1970, America wants out. All right. Again, for further reading, you just have a little bit of reading to do here. Chapter 25, just a few pages, and skip to 28, again, just a few pages. But I want to point out to you some of these pictures here. This is Viet Cong, and this is why it becomes so difficult for the American GI to know what he's doing or who he's fighting. Because it could literally be that young boy who comes into your camp on a daily basis wanting to learn how to play baseball. And then the day he comes in, he throws a hand grenade at you. He's Viet Cong. It could be that old farmer living in a hamlet. And you've come in and they're making soup, but the soup's poison and it kills a lot of you. Right? It's just a war that became a living hell for American soldiers. And this is a very infamous moment on television where the general for the ARVN executes a member of the Viet Cong live on television. And Americans saw that. And again, things like this, America lost all... Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. I'm going to have to end this. I got too much time in this to do this over again. So we'll end this now, and I'll see you guys later.